Amos Redd heard the boy start choking before he reached the porch, and for one foolish heartbeat he thought it was nothing more than ranch noise. A calf caught in wire, a mare coughing dust, some small trouble that could be fixed with a knife and a steady hand. Then he crossed the yard and saw Caleb bent over the horse trough with blood running from the corner of his mouth into the water. The evening smelled of dust and iron. Caleb straightened when he heard Amos's boots, trying to wipe his lip before he was seen. Even then the child was trying to spare someone else. "Don't tell Ma," he whispered. Amos reached him just as his knees gave way. The boy weighed almost nothing in his arms. That frightened him more than the blood. 6 months earlier Caleb had run the creek bank, climbed gates, and leaped from fence rails like a sparrow with a dare in it. Now he felt like a folded quilt wrapped around sticks. "You save your breath," Amos said, lifting him. "You hear me?" Caleb tried to smile. "I was only asking. Before we go farther tonight, settle in wherever you are and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. There is something good in knowing who has come to sit by the fire." Amos carried him into the house. His daughter Lena looked up from the kitchen table, where bills and feed invoices lay under the lamp. She took one look at Caleb's shirt front and went pale. Dr. Mercer arrived after dark and listened to Caleb's chest, pressing careful fingers against the ribs and staring too long at the floorboards before speaking. Amos had known men all his life by the pauses they took. This one was measuring how much truth the room could carry. "The infection's worsened," Mercer said. "There's fluid trapped deep in the lung. He needs surgery. A real surgeon. Santa Fe would be best. Raton, perhaps, if you catch the right man on the rail line." Lena gripped the back of a chair. "Can he survive the trip? If he rides flat and you move fast." Mercer took off his spectacles and polished them though they were clean. "You do not have much time." "How much money?" Amos asked. Mercer named the sum. Lena shut her eyes. Out beyond the wall, 38 head of longhorn cattle grazed in the north pasture. Amos had been holding them for a proper sale in Trinidad. Local prices were poor, and Eustace Varlan had spent the last year waiting for desperate people to sell cheap. "We don't have it," Lena said. "No," Amos answered. Mercer lowered his voice. 10 days before the fever takes too much from him. 2 weeks if the Lord is feeling generous." After the doctor left, Lena stood at the sink with both hands braced against the wood. She had lost her husband under a freight wagon 3 winters earlier and had not asked life for mercy since. "I'll sell the herd," he said. "To Varlan?" she asked. "He'll pay half value and act kind for doing it." "I won't sell here." The meaning settled over her face all at once. "No." "Yes." "You are not leading a drive to Trinidad. If I leave at dawn and push careful but hard, I can make Calder's yard in 5 days. You are 69 years old. Only in the bones." She laughed once, and there was no humor in it. "And when have bones ever stopped mattering on a cattle drive?" He had no answer. His left knee ground like gravel every morning from an old arrow wound. His shoulder ached in wet weather from a bronc wreck outside Dodge. Sometimes at night his hands clenched shut around dreams he could not outride. Then Caleb called softly from the bedroom. "Grandpa." Amos went in. The boy lay propped against pillows, fever bright, breathing shallow. On the quilt beside him rested a small tin cavalry button, polished smooth from years in his pocket. Caleb had found it near the cottonwood by the creek when he was 5 and declared it lucky. "Am I dying?" he asked. There are lies a man can tell bankers, sheriffs, strangers, even himself. Not that one. Not to a child whose skin burned under his hand. "Not if I can help it," Amos said. Caleb studied him. Then he picked up the button and held it out. "Take this," he whispered. "For the drive." Amos tried to close the boy's fingers around it again, but Caleb shook his head. "You always bring things home." That sentence struck deeper than any wound Amos carried in his body. Because once, long ago, he had not brought someone home. His son Eli had been riding point at a spring crossing when the river took horse and boy together. Amos had heard one shout, seen one arm, and then nothing but current and foam. The river gave back the horse. It kept the son. Amos took the button and closed it into his palm. "Then I'll bring this back," he said. "And I'll bring back the money for a surgeon who thinks he knows more than death." Near midnight, he rode to Eustace Varlan's place because men like Varlan kept lamps burning late for the exact hour when decent people ran out of choices. The house stood white against the dark, too sharp and clean for ranch country. Varlan met him on the porch in a robe that looked soft enough to fear dust. Well now, he said, come to be reasonable. I need 30 days on the herd note. Varlan leaned against a post. Do you? My grandson is sick. I'll drive the cattle to Trinidad and settle in full. Or, Varlan said, smooth as lamp oil, you can sign the north pasture over tonight and spare yourself the hardship. Crickets rasped in the hedge. The boy needs 10 days, Amos said. Varlan smiled, and the smile had meanness in it now. Then I suppose his timing is unfortunate. Amos had buried a wife, buried friends, lost a son to water and sleep to memory. For one hot second he imagined wrapping both hands around Varlan's throat and squeezing until the moonlight left his eyes. Instead he said, you were raised badly. The smile vanished. The note comes due in 6 days. After that the herd and pasture are mine. Amos left before the urge to kill him became practical. At dawn he hired the only 3 riders he trusted without question. Tom Bledsoe, broad-backed and steady, with 2 missing fingers and no patience for fools. Nessa Quinn, a horsebreaker with a scar on her chin. Micah Vale, quiet as shade and twice as dependable, the best tracker Amos had ridden with in 20 years. A 4th ally appeared unasked as they were cutting the herd from the pasture. Rose Varlan rode through the gate on a dun mare, widow's black faded gray at the sleeves. She was Eustace's sister by blood and little else. You're not here on your brother's errand, Amos said. No. Her eyes moved toward the porch where Lena stood with Caleb wrapped in a blanket. I'm here because your daughter should not face this alone, because your route through Coyote Gap washed narrow last week, and because I brought what was owed. She handed Amos a canvas pouch. Inside were $40 in notes in gold. I don't take charity, he said. It isn't charity. Jonah's debt. Her husband had died in a mine collapse 5 years earlier. He always said your son saved him in the blizzard of '79. He meant to repay Eli. Seems right the money found its way here. Amos closed his hand around the pouch. Pride was a poor meal for a dying child. Rose drew out a folded sheet. Word from Calder's yard. He still remembers you. If the cattle come in standing, he'll pay fair. Amos looked at her. Why are you doing this? Because the wrong people have been taking too much for too long. Then the gate swung wider. Dust lifted under longhorn hooves, and the world changed the way it usually did. Not with thunder, but with someone climbing into the saddle because love had run out of gentler ideas. The first day passed under a hard blue sky. Dust rose around the herd like a second hide. Amos rode drag first, listening to the cattle breathe. That had always been his gift. By late afternoon, pain had settled deep in his left knee. Tom swung back from point. You ought to ride center and save that leg. I ride where the herd talks loudest. Stubborn is not a cure. It has carried me this far. They camped that night in a basin ringed with cedar. Nessa brewed coffee while Micah checked each horse in the half-dark. Amos sat apart from the fire with Caleb's button turning between thumb and finger. Nessa dropped beside him with a tin cup. You still carry guilt like some men carry tobacco, she said. That your way of cheering me? It's my way of naming what stinks. She nodded toward the button. Boy give you that. Amos nodded. He thinks you always bring things home. Amos stared into the flames. He's wrong at least once. After a while she said, a river can take a body. It can't take what love taught the people left behind. Those are different ledgers. He let that settle inside him. Different ledgers. That sounded truer than most sermons. Near noon the next day Micah found sign that 3 steers had been cut from the line. 2 riders. Fresh tracks. Amos took Tom and went after them while Nessa and Micah kept the herd moving north. They found the thieves in a dry wash trying to haze the stolen cattle through juniper. Boys, barely. One too young to carry his meanness properly. The other old enough to know shame and not wearing enough of it. Those steers belong to me, Amos called. The older one laughed. Amos rested the Spencer rifle across his saddle horn. That is a belief many men hold just before they learn something useful. The younger bolted. The older reached for his pistol and froze when Tom's shotgun looked at him. Walk away, Amos said. Leave the cattle. You ain't gonna hang me? For 3 steers? No. But if I see you again before winter, I'll teach Rope to remember your name. They got the cattle back. They lost an hour. Time mattered more than cattle now, which was saying something. By the 3rd afternoon the air changed. Even before the sky did, Amos felt it in his chest. The cattle felt it too. Heads lifted. A brindle cow let out a long, troubled bawl. Tom looked west. Storm. Amos listened harder. Beneath the hush came another sound. Hooves. Many of them. Not storm, he said. Riders. 6 men came out of the cedar flats ahead, spread wide enough to pinch the herd. At their head rode Buck Rains, once one of Amos's hands and later one of his sharper regrets. Afternoon, boss, Buck called. You don't get to call me that. Buck grinned. Mr. Varlan says your note comes due before you reach Trinidad. Means these cattle are disputed property. We're only here to prevent confusion. The herd began to mill. Nessa moved up on Amos's left. Micah drifted right, his face unreadable. Disputed is not the same as stolen, Amos said. Buck shrugged. 6 rifles make a fair legal argument. And here is where I want to ask you something. Because every honest life reaches a place where the safe choice and the right one no longer share the same road. If keeping your word meant putting yourself in danger, would you still do it? Would you trust honor over fear? Tell me what you think below, because Amos had one breath to choose and no room at all for cowardice. He chose hard. Turn the herd, he shouted. Everything broke loose. Nessa hooped and slashed her slicker through the air. Tom fired a warning blast that sent Buck's horse sideways. Micah drove hard along the flank to keep the longhorns tight. Amos went straight at Buck. Buck fired first and missed wide. Amos's horse slammed shoulder to shoulder with Buck's mare. Amos brought the rifle barrel down across Buck's wrist, and the revolver dropped into the dust. Then one steer bolted, another answered, and the world became thunder. A stampede begins like a mistake and ends like weather. Dust rose in a solid wall. Horns struck. Hooves pounded hard enough to rattle teeth. Amos rode by sound, not sight. The leaders carried the fear. Turn them, and maybe the rest would follow. Lose them, and the whole country could die running. A longhorn burst through the dust, eyes white. Amos leaned low and slapped its muzzle with the brim of his hat, while bellowing from somewhere older than speech. Another came. Then 3. His horse nearly fell, recovered, plunged on. Pain hammered his knee. Grit packed his throat. Then, through the brown chaos, Micah appeared on the right flank and Nessa on the left. Together they bent the front edge of the herd toward a dry arroyo where the banks rose steep and high. The lead cattle checked. That single hesitation saved them. The herd slammed into itself, milled, circled, bawled, and finally settled into furious, exhausted motion. Silence returned in pieces. Tom rode in with Buck at gunpoint. One hired rider had a broken arm. 2 more had fled. Micah was bleeding through his sleeve. We hold them, she asked. We hold them. Then Amos counted. 36 head. 2 lost. 4 of his people still breathing. Buck spat at the ground. This changes nothing. Varlan owns your paper. Micah pressed a bandana to his arm. Search him. Nessa turned out Buck's pockets and found a folded letter sealed in Varlan's hand. She opened it, read it, and passed it over without speaking. The orders were plain. Stop the drive before the state line. Scatter enough cattle to ruin the sale. Swear Amos had mishandled disputed stock so the sheriff could seize what remained. And at the bottom, in Varlan's own handwriting, one last line sharp as a knife. If the old man resists, make it final. Tom let out a low breath. That man writes murder like bookkeeping. Amos folded the paper and tucked it inside his vest. They tied Buck and the wounded rider through the night and pushed north again at first light. No one wasted talk. The trail had grown too narrow for it. By the 4th evening they reached Willow Cut, where creek and rock wall pressed the herd into a stone funnel. Amos slid from the saddle and studied the mud beside the water. Fresh prints. Too many. Nessa saw them too. He sent more. Ahead lay Trinidad, money, and the surgeon. Behind lay home, where Caleb was breathing by inches. Move fast, Amos said. The first shot cracked from the ridge before the words had fully left him. Tom's hat spun into the creek. A second bullet hit stone beside Amos's boot. Drives over, old man, someone shouted above. Amos swung into the saddle. No, he said, every scar and grave inside him hardening at once. It surely isn't. Nessa tore the pack mules loose and sent them crashing upstream to draw fire. Micah climbed the right bank on foot, moving low through juniper shadow. Tom fired both barrels, reloaded, fired again. Amos took the herd into the creek. It was madness, but water could break speed and mud could ruin aim. The lead cattle splashed in, slipped, shoved, recovered. One steer went down. Another climbed over it. For a sickening second Amos saw the whole herd knotting itself into death. Then Nessa turned the leaders just enough to find firmer gravel, and the line began to move. Bullets hissed in water. One grazed Amos's upper arm with the hot kiss of a fresh brand. Then Buck Rains appeared on the far bank with a revolver in one hand and Caleb's tin button in the other. Amos went cold from skull to spine. Buck grinned. "Found this in your bedroll." Then he flung it into the creek. The world narrowed to that little flash of tin vanishing into muddy current. Amos should have stayed with the herd. Any wise man would have. But love will make both fool and weapon of a man. He wheeled his horse and drove straight at Buck. The gun fired. Amos felt the shot tear cloth from his sleeve and miss flesh by mercy alone. Then he hit Buck high and hard. They crashed into the shallows with water punching around them. Buck clawed for the revolver. Amos drove his forearm across the younger man's throat and held him down. All the strength he thought age had stolen returned in that bitter instant. "You should have let the cattle go," Buck choked. Amos shoved his head underwater. Not long. Just long enough for terror to do the talking. When he dragged Buck back up, the man was coughing and crying both. Micah appeared beside them, rifle in hand. "The button," he said. It had lodged against a stone 2 feet away. Amos bent, pain splitting through knee and shoulder, and picked it out of the current. Something shifted inside him then. He had spent years believing the trail only took from him. But here in cold water under gunfire, he understood what the years had also built. Instincts that still held, friends who stayed, and a stubbornness fierce enough to drag love through hell and not let it drown. They reached Trinidad after moonrise with 36 exhausted longhorns, 1 bound rustler, and 1 signed order that would ruin a rich man before breakfast. Calder met them in the stockyard at first light, penciled behind one ear. "Bit light," he said after walking the herd. "Fast driven," Amos answered. "Still sound." Calder named a fair number. In younger years Amos would have fought him for more just on principle. This time he said, "Done," before the echo died. Then Sheriff Dominguez arrived with coffee still steaming in his hand, and Buck Rains chose self-preservation over loyalty. "Varlan hired us," he blurted before anyone asked. "Told us to stop the drive and kill Amos if he fought." The yard fell quiet. Dominguez read the letter once, then again slower. "That," he said, "is a surprising amount of stupidity to commit to paper." Warrants went south by telegraph within the hour. By dusk Eustace Varlan was in irons. Rose and Lena had done work of their own while Amos rode. They went through Varlan's ledgers with a banker and found forged liens, false weights, stolen acreage, and widow's money. The bank turned on him before sunset. Men like Varlan always believed their power permanent until paper learned how to bite. Amos wired the surgeon, paid for the rail berth, and bought the fastest team back home. Money meant nothing until it was spent. He reached the ranch after dark. Rose opened the door before he knocked, as if she had been listening for hoofbeats for hours. Lena stood behind her, hands clasped so hard the knuckles looked like chalk. "Well?" she asked. Amos held up the buyer's receipt and the surgeon's wire. Lena covered her mouth and made a sound like a prayer breaking open. Caleb was worse. Fever had sharpened his face. Every breath ended in that terrible whistle. "We leave now," Amos said. The trip to the rail station passed in lamplight, ruts, medicine, and the quiet raw terror of a family measuring each breath. Rose rode inside the wagon beside Lena. Whenever the wheels lurched, she steadied Caleb before anyone asked. Near dawn, when the boy started drifting in fever, Rose bent close and began naming stars above winter pasture as if she were talking him across open country. At the station, steam rolled white around them. Amos lifted Caleb into the train berth himself. The child's eyes opened for a moment. "You came back," he whispered. "Told you I would." Amos tucked the tin button into his hand. "And I brought your luck." Lena kissed Amos once, hard and quick, before boarding. "Come if you can." He knew what she meant. Come if justice does not steal another day. Come if old age does not collect its due. Come if love is still enough. After the train pulled away, Rose remained beside him on the platform. Wind loosened a few gray strands from under her hat. "I don't know what debt I owe you anymore," Amos said. "Then stop counting," she answered. "Some things are not meant to be settled. Some things are meant to be carried together." They waded through the surgery in a corridor that smelled of lye, boiled linen, and dread. Lena paced. Amos sat. Rose sat beside him. Their shoulders touched once and stayed that way. After an hour that felt longer than some winters, Amos bowed his head and said the thing he had not spoken aloud in years. When Eli drowned, I spent half my life believing God had mistaken which boy to take. Rose did not flinch. She laid her hand over his scarred one. Grief says cruel things in a loved one's voice, she said. That doesn't make them true. Something in him unclenched then. Not healed, but eased enough to breathe differently. When the surgeon finally came out, his sleeves were rolled high and his face was gray with effort. The infection was deep, he said, but we drained it in time. If the fever breaks by morning, the boy should live. Lena folded over with a sob. Amos sat back against the wall because his legs had forgotten their work. The fever broke before dawn. Later, when Caleb finally slept without fighting for every breath, Amos stood by the narrow hospital window. Snow had begun to fall in small bright flecks against the dark. Rose came to stand beside him. For a long while neither of them spoke. Then Amos said quietly, I used to think strength was bringing everybody home yourself. Turns out sometimes strength is letting somebody walk the road beside you. Rose looked at him with that steady tenderness that never asked permission to be plain. The heaviest things in this world were never meant for one pair of hands. If this story has moved you tonight, you are exactly who it was written for. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and know that stories like this keep finding their way to us because people like you keep making room for them. Justice finished its work while Caleb healed. Varlan's ledgers opened like rotten boards under a boot. Widow Hanratty got back her orchard strip. 2 ranchers reclaimed pasture stolen under false weights. At trial, Eustace Varlan lost his money, his house, his standing, and finally his freedom. He did not leave with dignity. That mattered to the valley. By late autumn, Caleb came home pale but alive. Then pale and stronger. Then strong enough to complain about Lena's broth, which everyone agreed was a blessed improvement. Rose stayed often, first to help, then because no one asked her to leave, then because leaving anywhere else began to make less and less sense. One evening Amos found Caleb in the barn doorway wrapped in a coat too big for him, watching dust turn gold in the slanting light. Ma says I can't lift anything heavier than a cat, Caleb said bitterly. That puts your schoolbooks in danger. The boy smiled. Then his face turned serious. Grandpa, were you scared? Amos looked toward the north pasture, where new calves moved close beside their mothers. Yes, he said. Bad scared. Caleb nodded slowly, as if that answer made the world more trustworthy. Me too. There it was. The plain truth under all of it. Courage was never the absence of fear. It was love choosing a direction while fear made all its noise. The first frost came silver across the grass. One morning Amos stepped onto the porch and found Rose there with 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cold. In the yard below, Caleb was trying to teach a half-grown pup to heel and achieving only confusion on both sides. The valley wants to know if you'll lead the spring drive, Rose said. The valley has gone soft in the head. I told them your better judgment had finally arrived. And what did they say to that? That they'd wait to see what I talked you into. Amos set his cup aside. I spent a long time thinking what I'd lost was the whole of my story. Rose turned toward him. Turns out an old trail can still lead a man somewhere worth arriving. Her expression softened. Then perhaps you ought not stop walking yet. He kissed her there on the porch. No thunder. No audience. Just cold air, warm coffee, and the quiet astonishment of finding tenderness still alive after so much weather. By Christmas, Caleb could run the full yard without stopping. By spring, he was strong enough to ride fence with Amos for an hour at a time, face turned to the wind like a boy who had made friends with breathing again. The north pasture greened. The well Varlan once meant to steal watered red cattle carrying fresh calves into another season. People came to the ranch not out of pity, but fellowship. In a valley that had watched too much cruelty prosper, the red place became proof that loyalty could grow interest and justice could arrive with dust on its boots. Years later, when Caleb was tall enough to throw a saddle one-handed and wise enough to read a contract twice before signing, Amos sat beneath the creek cottonwood and listened to his grandson laughing with Rose on the porch while Lena shelled peas in the fading light. He had once believed peace was something a man outran to if he survived enough sorrow. Turned out peace was what waited when you finally stopped measuring life by what had been taken and started honoring what had stayed. Evening light lay across the pasture like worn gold, and the house windows shone warm against the coming blue. Next time, We'll tell the story of the deaf seamstress sent west because her brothers were ashamed of her, and the burned rancher who recognized her courage long before he ever understood her hands.